the 1507 Adam and Eva painting. We don't know for whom these paintings were commissioned, but we do know they were acquired by the Bishop of Breslau, Johann v. Thurzo, a distant relation to the Fugger family, and then ended up in the collection of the Emperor Rudolf II in Prague. It's clearly obvious by the use of poisonous colors. It wasn't someone the Dürers liked. Look at Eva's flesh. It's described as whiter than white. Then Adam's skin, white lead everywhere, with the poisonous green right at the genitals, with the killer black paint in extraordinary amounts. Let us not forget, when one gets close to the painting, to read the inscription left by Albrecht. They are greeted with white lead, very close to the face. The Haller Altarpiece. The Haller altar was an oil-on-panel triptych by German Renaissance artists Dürer and Matthias Grunwald, executed between 1507 and 1509. In 1615, Dürer copyist Jacob Herrick painted a duplicate, which is now at the Städel Museum in Frankfurt. In 1615, the central panel, the only one by Dürer alone, was sold to Maximilian of Bavaria. A copy was ordered to replace the original in its location at the church's high altar. The central panel was destroyed by a fire in Munich in 1729. The side panels, executed by Dürer's assistants, were completed by 4 others commissioned to Matthias Grunwald in 1510. The side shutters were detached in the 18th century, and each of the 2 panels composing them were separated in 1804. This altarpiece was commissioned by Jacob Haller, 1460 to 1522, a wealthy merchant, member of the town council and mayor of Frankfurt, either before or after Dürer's second trip to Italy. Only the central element depicting the Assumption and coronation of the Virgin was executed by Dürer himself. The altarpiece was destroyed by a fire in the residence of Duke Maximilian of Bavaria in Munich. Fortunately, a copy of the work executed around 1614 by Jacob Herrick of Nuremberg, circa 1580 to 1617, had survived. Albrecht was receiving many commissions after having won the paint-off with the Italians in Venice in 1506, especially from this old patron, the Elector, Duke Frederick of Saxony. Albrecht wrote to Haller. Of course, the originals were lost, but there were copies paid for by the Archduke Maximilian of Bavaria, who acquired the paintings and wanted the provenance and documentation, as well as those German scribe copyists were very busy. He thus tells us, he was sick from returning from Venice, all that partying, and he had to finish the Elector's altarpiece first, the Martyrdom of the 10,000, and then he would start on the Haller's altarpiece. The outcome of the whole situation was that Haller misunderstood all of Albrecht's intentions, almost sued him for breach of contract, trashed Albrecht Dürer's reputation to everyone in town, and pissed off Albrecht beyond comprehension. In his last letter to Haller, Albrecht makes the following remarks, quote, "I have painted it with great care, as you will see, using none but the best colors. It is painted with good ultramarine under and over about 5 or 6 times. And then, after it was finished, I overpainted it twice more, so that it may last a long time, for it is not made as one usually paints. So don't let it be touched or sprinkled with holy water, and place the painting so it hangs forward 2 or 3 finger breadths, so it can be seen without glare. And when I come to you in a year or 2 or 3, if the picture is properly dry, it must be taken down, and I will varnish it again with some excellent varnish that no one else can make." End quote. Do we see enough blues and reds and greens and orpiment? and lead white to kill a horse, especially if the painting wouldn't be dry for possibly 3 years. The Martyrdom of the 10,000 for the Elector, Duke Frederick of Saxony. The altarpiece depicts the legend of the 10,000 Christians who were martyred on Mount Ararat in a massacre perpetrated by the Persian king Saparat on the command of Roman emperors Hadrian and Antonius. Dürer had depicted this massacre a decade earlier in a woodcut. The painting was commissioned by Frederick the Wise, who owned relics from the massacre, and it was placed in the relic chamber of his palace church in Wittenberg. Although Dürer had never tackled a painting with so many figures, he succeeded in integrating them in a flowing composition using vibrant color. Dürer's gruesome scene depicts scores of Christians meeting a violent death in a rocky landscape, providing a venerable compendium of tortures and killings. The Oriental potentate in the blue coat and turban, who is directing the action in the lower right corner of the picture, would in Dürer's time have been perceived as a reference to the threat of the Turkish invasion because of the seizure of Constantinople in 1453. In the center of the painting is a rather incongruous figure of the artist holding a staff with the inscription, "This work was done in the year 1508 by Albrecht Dürer, German." The man walking with him through the scene of carnage is probably the scholar Conrad Keltis, a friend of Dürer's who had died just before the painting was completed. I think you can see enough poisonous paints in this painting to realize that Dürer's also hated the Duke. Portrait of a young man. Blacks, lead white, and reds. This striking portrait, painted in Venice, shows a thoughtful young man, richly dressed and dramatically set against a black background. His thick ginger hair, partly hidden with his dark hat, frames his face. The small part of his red shirt showing adds a dramatic touch of color. Charles I acquired this work for the royal collection. Portrait of Burkhard von Speyer. The sitter was identified as Burkhard von Speyer after it was realized that he looks just like the man in a miniature in Weimar by an unknown artist, also dated 1506 and inscribed with his name. Nothing more is known about him, although presumably he originally came from Speyer, a town on the Rhine near Heidelberg. Burkhard von Speyer also appears in the altarpiece of the Rose Garlands, wearing the same clothing. He is on the left side of the picture, just to the right of the first kneeling cardinal. You can't get a blacker portrait, with the reds and the lead white, than the one Albrecht made for Charles V. The Feast of the Rose Garlands. This is the painting that won the paint-off between the Venetian Italians and Dürer in 1506. This panel was painted for an altar for the German community in Venice, in the Church of St. Bartholomew, where it remained until 1606. It was then acquired after many negotiations for 900 ducats by Emperor Rudolph II. According to Sandrit, 4 men were hired to bring the packaged painting to the Emperor's residence in Prague. Stationed elsewhere during the invasion of the Swedish troops, the painting, already very damaged, returned to its place in 1635. It underwent a first restoration in 1662. In 1782, it was sold at an auction for 1 florin. After having passed through the hands of various collectors, it was acquired by the Czechoslovakian state in 1930. The painting, severely damaged chiefly in the center portion, from the head of the Madonna and continually downward to the bottom, was clumsily restored in the 19th century. In this restoration, the upper side portion left of the canopy and to St. Dominic's head was also included. 3 copies of the work are known. One, considered the most important and which now belongs to a private collection, is attributed to Hans Rottenhammer, who sojourned in Venice from 1596 to 1606, where he took care of many acquisitions on behalf of Rudolph II. Another is in Vienna, and the third, a rather modified version of the original, is in Lyon. Have a close look at this painting. There's enough toxic paint to kill all the Italians and Germans too. Portrait of a young Venetian woman. The portrait is one of the first works of the artist during his second sojourn in Venice. It was painted in the autumn or in the winter of 1506. With reference to some of the details, it has been repeatedly made known that the portrait is unfinished. Look at the reds, the lead white and the black, added for extra danger, suspiciously left unfinished. The Adoration of the Magi. The Elector, Frederick the Wise of Saxony, ordered this painting for the church castle in Wittenberg. It was once believed to be the central part of a polyptych, with, on the side wings, the story of Job, in Frankfurt and Cologne. However, this hypothesis has already been called into question. The Elector of Saxony then donated the painting to Emperor Rudolph II in 1603, in exchange with the presentation at the temple by Fra Bartolomeo, brought in 1793 from the gallery in Venice to the Uffizi. Dürer framed and delimited a large space by an architecture composed of arches in a very refined perspective. The 3 kings arrived at this slightly elevated space from the back after having climbed 2 steps. A single figure, sharply foreshortened, followed in their footsteps and in the distant background. Only the upper half of his body is shown, where he now stands at the bottom of the 2 steps. He is oriental and wearing a turban. The heavy traveling bag he holds probably contains precious gifts for the infant Jesus. The Madonna is clad in azure clothes and cape, a white veil covering her head. She is holding out the infant, who is wrapped in her white veil, to the eldest king, who wears deadly green clothing. He is offering the infant a gold casket with the image of St. George, which the infant has already taken with his right hand. This is the only action that unfolds in the principal scene, except for the Oriental servant's gesture of putting his hand in his bag. All the other characters are motionless, immersed in thought. They look straight ahead or sideways, creating the effect of a stage spectacle set with immobile characters. Every color in this painting is horrendously toxic, and right in the viewer's face and nostrils. The Paumgartner Altar. This triptych was commissioned by the brothers Stephen and Lucas Paumgartner for St. Catherine's Church in Nuremberg. The main panel depicts the Nativity, set in an architectural ruin. The left wing shows St. George with a fearsome dragon, and the right wing with St. Eustace, with both saints dressed as knights and holding identifying banners. A 17th century manuscript records that the side panels were painted in 1498 and that the 2 saints were given the features of the Paumgartner brothers, with Stephen on the left and Lucas on the right. This is the earliest occasion on which an artist is known to have used the facial features of a donor in depicting a saint. But of course, Stephen was Albrecht's lover. The small figures at the bottom corners of the central panel are the Paumgartner family with their coats of arms, painted over in the 17th century, when donor portraits went out of favor and were only uncovered during restoration in 1903. On the left behind Joseph are the male members of the family, Martin Paumgartner, followed by his two sons Lucas and Stephen, and an elderly bearded figure who may be Hans Schonbach, second husband of Barbara Paumgartner. On the far right is Barbara Paumgartner, with her daughters Maria and Barbara. Every color in this altarpiece is toxic, and especially with the restoration could still be. The Virgin of the Seven Sorrows. This panel is a large picture depicting Mary as the Mother of Sorrows. It was severely damaged in an attack when acid was thrown at it in 1988, and 10 years had been spent restoring it. It is the central picture of 7 scenes from the Passion, which are now in Dresden. The work was presumably ordered by the Elector Frederick the Wise. Look at the black and the white lead, the ornament in the blue, which doesn't even show well in this picture, but I have just returned from seeing it at the Städel. A deadly toxic painting for all to look at, worship, and inhale. And this brings us to the end of the examples of the deadly toxic paintings the Dürers made for their patrons. Thank goodness these are all in museums where only the staff are still being exposed to such dangers. And stay tuned, because we will be discussing the family portrait paintings